Welcome everyone to our webinar today. Good morning, good afternoon. The webinar will start in a minute, and we want to be sharing that we will record this webinar and that we will share, of course, the link of this webinar after the meeting. It will be sent either today or tomorrow. During the meeting, there is time to share some questions via the chat. And now I will hand over to Jaap Slothouwer. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, and good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are, maybe even good evening out of our Eastern Front. Very happy to host this meeting. My name is Jaap Slothouwer. I'm the Executive Director for the Netherlands Foreign Investment Agency for the Western Hemisphere, based out of Washington, D.C. So it is a clear, snowy, and cold morning here in Washington, and I'm welcoming you all to the webinar Demystifying EU Regulations with the European Medicine Agency here today. Very happy also to see that it's been a joint effort and it's also being brought to you by the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. I see Kim Tran here, who I've worked with before a long time, from the Netherlands Innovation Network. She's based out of Boston. And of course, our team of the Netherlands Foreign Investment Agency out of The Hague. For today, we're going to keep it as short as possible in the introduction, but it is important. We have about 40 minutes, as Sandra mentioned, to go through a lot of details, and our goal is to inform you about the EU market entry and how you can work with the EMA early on in the application process. There's going to be hopefully ample time, 20 minutes or so, for our Q&As, but in keeping it short and focusing on the most important part of it, it's welcoming our three guests from the EMA, Sebastian, Asprella, Martin Botulinski, and Thomas Ballotti. Starting with Sebastian, 25 years of leadership in multiple industries, and now leads the EU competitive initiatives at the EMA, focusing on science-based regulatory pathways that help clusters, tech transfer offices, and small medium-sized enterprises in translating European scientific excellence into tangible patient benefits. Martin Botulinski, he's on the regulatory side of the EMA, and Martin bridges the gap nicely between clinical practice and health policy through his background as a registered nurse and health economist. He focuses on enhancing EU competitiveness by applying data-driven insights and strategic modeling to the evolving pharmaceutical landscape. And last but not least, our scientific officer from the EMA, Thomas Ballotti. And Thomas brings extensive expertise in navigating regulatory pathways for small and medium-sized enterprises. And with deep background as a regulatory affairs pharmacist in both the public and private sectors, he's dedicated to simplifying the regulatory environment and supporting the life cycle of innovative medicine. And I think that's the bottom line of where we want to get at. Regulatory is key, but it is also key to understand how to move, especially as an SME party, as swift and as easy as possible through the different hordes to get where we want to go. And that is bringing the application to the patient in the most efficient time possible. That's where the EMA, the EMA, the European Medicine Agency stands for, but also the Netherlands Innovation Network and the Netherlands Foreign Investment Agency. We're here to support. This presentation and the webinar today is going to bring you a lot of information, but hopefully it's also going to widen your network. So please make use of the network here, make it work, and reach out to any of us if you have any further questions beyond today's webinar and program. I thank you very much, and I'll give you the floor, Sebastian.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We had a look at the audience, and we understand it's kind of a mix, majority developers, but also other entities as well. And I want to thank you all for joining today. Today is we're trying to make it as practical session as possible, considering it's a hybrid. And you will notice, hopefully, towards the end of the presentation, that the aim really is at developers and where it all came about. And I'll talk a bit more about the European Medicines Agency for those that we may be new to. But it was a realization about a year ago from our leadership to try and understand the outcome of certain key reports, such as the Draghi report and the report, which I will talk in a moment, and try to understand it in a way of what can the agency do when it comes to EU competitiveness. And I'm super grateful to be in this role for a year. Myself, thank you for the introduction. I'm an entrepreneur, already 2 startups under my belt in a different industry, though, in aerospace. And one of the things that I realized since the outset is how complex the life cycle regulatory process is. And I thought, putting a satellite into space from napkin sketch to launch would be hard. But this is very complex. So the idea behind the presentation, which we will share with yourselves, you'll see some of the slides may be a little bit content heavy, but it should be used also as a kind of a book or helping hand to be able to access when you have more time. But yeah, the idea is we will walk you through the main tools, when to use the tools, and also how to frame questions. So effectively, when you reach out to EMA, we are able to provide the support that you need as swiftly as possible. In terms of questions, please note it down in the chat. We will do our best to answer the questions as we go through the presentation, and there may be a few questions that we may go a little bit more in detail if we have the time, and Kim is going to help us facilitate that. But we'll try our best to keep to time, and also we're happy to follow up, bilaterally afterwards as well. So, what is the EMA? Well, we're a medical regulator. We're a decentralized agency. We've been operating since 1995. Believe it or not, that's over 3 decades. In fact, it's our 31st year this year. And we evaluate medicines for both humans and animals. We relatively recently relocated to Amsterdam. We were in the UK before. And our mission really is encapsulated into sort of the 3 words you see on the screen. So science, medicine, and health. Now, back in 95, we made a commitment to science and public health, really to try and be a truly European system for assessing medicines, whereas before it was mainly kind of member state by member state. But ultimately, to be able to help, serve, and protect patients and animals in the EU. And we do so by leveraging the brightest minds. And I'm so grateful to be working with the colleagues within EMA, but also throughout the network of the 27 member states. Ultimately, because we do impact, and I believe so, we do so positively, lives of millions of Europeans and beyond as well. So yeah, with that in mind, we do see it as a network. We see it as a network of 50 different national competent authorities. So these are the authorities that actually sit in each one of the different member states. And we have, give or take, about 4,000 scientific experts. So not only do we have the experts within the agency, and you'll see, for example, in some of the supporting tools, we do tap into that expertise, but it's also wider than that. And every day through our work, we serve the needs of 450 million people in Europe, which at least at personal level is something that gives me a lot of satisfaction. And the network, what we're part of, unites us all to create a single market for pharmaceuticals. You'll see we have a couple of slides in terms of, we've been asked, could you talk about the difference between the FDA and the EMA? So I'm not going to dive into the details now, but Martin is going to take us through the presentation down the road. And members are all different, but together we create what we value ourselves as EU citizens, and how, well, we work together, we pool all of our resources and coordinate the work. We can also create consistent standards, and having worked in various different countries and 4 continents so far myself, I think certain standards or standardization does help to elevate humanity overall. At least that's my impression. And ultimately, it brings us all together, all of our scientific experts, and in a way, because also we have different languages across Europe, as I'm sure you know, these standards also help us communicate faster, share information, and especially when it comes to important safety issues, even during post-authorization activities. So I think in a way, this is what makes us stand out. The EMA is a single point for marketing authorization in the EU by the so-called centralized authorization procedure, which we will talk about this as well. But the principle is very simple. It's one application, one assessment, and one marketing authorization, which is valid for everywhere in Europe. And I want to emphasize that because I know from some contacts and mainly informal feedback, it seems to be quite scattered, but it is indeed, it's very simple. It's one application, one assessment, and one marketing authorization, which is valid everywhere in Europe. And what makes this possible is the network. We operate within a system of reliance and recognition that relies on trust between us all. And our medicines evaluations are sent to the European Commission, who are the authorizing body, which then takes a legal binding decision to authorize a medicine for use in the EU. For industry and developers, the benefit of this single procedure saves them time and resources rather than having to apply via 27 different member states. Now, just maybe going into the kind of the core of the presentation today, we'll talk about EU competitiveness and the regulatory pathways that I think are perhaps what matters most to you. Then we will walk through the EU medicines regulatory life cycle and clarify who does what in the EU system. You'll see that there's some nuances there that I think are worth clarifying. And then we'll zoom right into where EMA fits, especially through the centralized authorization procedure, the different life cycle activities. But I would like to emphasize that the core of the session today is the scientific and regulatory support tools. And we have been actually contacting all of the biotech hubs and technology transfer offices, all the capital allocators, at least the ones that we managed to map, which is also part of the exercise as part of the EMA network strategy to 2028, and it's also part of the key activities in 2026 for the agency. And one thing has been consistent. We've been fed back time and time again that they were not aware of the supporting tools. So you will see when we talk about the exercise itself, this is kind of the raising awareness. And then we'll share some practical tips on how to get the right advice and avoid some common feedbacks. And towards the very end, we'll take the Q&As as I mentioned earlier. Now, I will try to pace the content of the presentation today as much as I can, but we do have quite a bit to get through, so do bear with us. You will get the presentation pack afterwards. This is public information, so we will be making sure that you have access to this. But now, what's happening at the regulatory realities level? So where is the EU strategy at? And I think there is a clear recognition that Europe has an innovation and competitiveness gap versus specifically areas in the world like the US and parts of Asia. This was highlighted through key reports, and if you have not had a chance to look at them, by all means we can share. You can Google them, Draghi and Letta reports. They both highlighted a scale-up problem in Europe. We have brilliant science. We have a lot of innovative activities happening, but many of them tend to leave Europe, and many of them tend to fail to reach patients in the EU as well. Now, one of the things that came up was actually perhaps insufficient regulatory predictability, insufficient speed, insufficient coherence, and this is one of the critical enablers that then impact investment decisions. Now, with regards to EMA and the wider European regulatory network, this is an explicit part of what we think is the solution. We want to turn EU-level ambitions into concrete, predictable regulatory pathways. And what I will show you today, or what we will show today from the EMA, is how we move from the sort of strategy documents to more actionable tools that you can use in your development programs. So there's different layers that we looked at. In sort of the macro diagnosis compared to US and Asia, we see lower levels of late-stage investments, fewer large biotech scaling in Europe. There is a fragmentation of rules and procedures across some of the member states that do create some friction. And specifically when we look at pain points around the regulatory uncertainty, how this translates into directly or into perceived investment and the risk of capital. And, the so-called black box. I mean, there are some companies that tend to, we picked up the feedback, postpone engagement because of perceived risk or certain misalignments. And what we want to come in is as an enabler. We're a regulatory body, of course, we have guardrails, the ultimate goal is public health, but we do see a slight shift between being purely a gatekeeper at the end to being a partner alongside the development pathway. And this is obviously within our legal framework, and this is where the toolbox And as an entrepreneur myself, I tend to carry a toolbox like a plumber has, or a carpenter, or an automobile engineer. So I see myself also in a role to be able to share and raise awareness about these tools that the agency offers that are designated to reduce uncertainty, to provide clarity, especially providing clarity and expectations early, and support efficient evidence generation that ultimately will help public health in Europe. Now, what we have done briefly, without going into a lot of details, is I joined the agency about a year ago. There was a lot of talks about EU competitiveness. What does this mean in practice to us? So we first defined EU competitiveness within the mandate and the legal framework of the EMA. And how do we go about it? And one of the things we thought is, okay, let's just go into a number of pilots. Let's focus particularly in the sort of fragmentation issue that was highlighted by Draghi. But then we realized, okay, well, there's not that much awareness on the toolbox. So we had to kind of take a step back and go into step one, which you see on the screen now, which is awareness. And this is also the reason why we're here. It's kind of obvious. I'm not going to dwell too much into that. But we are in parallel moving to kind of a stage two, where we do have some interaction with some strategic partners throughout the sphere between biotech, TTO, and investors, and really to try and understand, what kind of challenges are they facing? What are the risks that they're considering? Is the raising awareness enough? And for that, in fact, Leiden was the first point of call, as it's only 40 minutes by train from EMA. But also we're going and we're trying to pick across the EU different partners to be able to go through this little bit more in-depth pilots. And then we have step three, which is integrated, so embedding all of that feedback, all of that learning. Of course, we don't have legislative powers. The EMA should clarify that, but we do have, of course, the steer in terms of how we operate, what programs we run. So ultimately, to have that, that feedback internalized and see how within our ecosystem we can have better support structures. So over time, this should mean, I would say, fewer surprises at the marketing authorization stage. But ultimately, our goal really is to accelerate Europe to be able to make the EU competitive overall. So with that in mind, briefly, I mentioned we mapped out and we continue to map out. We have 106 biotech hubs and TTOs and 48 venture capital allocators in Europe. And this is a constantly growing environment. We will be releasing a web map, if useful, in the next few weeks. So that's something that we will share here with the colleagues and maybe share a little bit more wider. Now, in terms of the slide summary, is the journey from discovery to patients throughout the centralized EU procedure. We have kind of early stages that cover the targeting, identification. Then we have preclinical work and first-in-human studies. And then we keep going through the life cycle. And Thomas is going to take us through the supporting tools at different stages. But I think it's important that, first of all, to be clear who does what in the EU medicines regulatory system. So the EMA coordinates the scientific evaluation of medicines that are eligible for the so-called centralized procedure through our expert committees. But it does not itself authorize medicines. It gives a scientific opinion, and then the European Commission is the one that takes the final legal binding decision on all EU-wide marketing authorizations based on EMA's opinion. Now, the national competent authorities in the member states, they authorize most medicines nationally and also participate in EMA scientific work. And then the fixing of prices and reimbursement, or what we call the market access, is in the remit of the national health technology assessment bodies. So understanding this division of roles helps, I imagine, again, putting myself in your shoes, it helps you plan where and how to interact both with EMA and with the national authorities. Now, the slide here summarizes, before I pass over the floor of the microphone to my esteemed colleague, Thomas, we wanted to summarize the main tools, at least the tools that we picked up, and then we will map them against the different development stages, as you will see. Now, the so-called innovation task force and the academia are typically used very early when concepts and approaches are still being shaped. The SME office can be contacted at any point in the development, from early stage of R&D to post-authorization stage. And in fact, again, trying to put myself in the developer shoes, And by all means, we have different concepts of what it may be earliest stage or not. My first point of call would be the SME office, not because they're great colleagues, but also they are the ones that you could have a conversation, although non-binding, about regulatory strategy and some other things that Thomas is going to take us through. And then we have other tools like scientific advice, Prime, ATMP, which Thomas is going to shed some light. Also, we have ORFA designation, pediatric plans in parallel, and it really depends on your target population. But I think sort of the key message that we want to convey before I pass over the floor is that choose the tools strategically based on your profile, on your product profile, and on the decisions you need to make, not just because they exist, but at the same time, tap into them. Most of these tools are free of charge. We don't keep a record of who contacts or who said the wrong thing. And by all means, this is kind of the informal feedback I get sometimes of the concerns when they look at the EMA as a monolithic organization. We're really here as part of the process, not to be hindering, but really to support, where we can, the work that is being done by all of you in the field. And before I pass over to Thomas, I do feel like entrepreneurs are social benefactors. I mean, all of the work that entrepreneurs across all the industries that I have met generally do have a positive impact on humanity overall. So I thank you for participating today in this event. So Thomas, over to you. Thank you.
So thank you, Sebastian, and good afternoon or good morning to everybody. And I'm now going to guide you through all the existing tools to support you in bringing your medicine to the patients. So coming back to the lab-to-patient overview, we are going now to focus on the first three phases of the process. So from discovery to the medicine evaluation. So the EMA is available to interact with you from very early research all the way through post-authorization. At the preclinical and early clinical stage, tools like ITF, scientific advice, NCLP classification, and other SME office supports are available. When you will start planning your pivotal trials and marketing authorization strategy, this is where scientific advice, pediatric plans, and orphan designation become critical. And after the authorization, there are also tools for post-authorization safety and effectiveness studies and lifecycle management. So the key message of this slide is to see these interaction as part of one overall global development strategy and not as isolated administrative steps. Okay, your startups. You have absolutely no clue about the European regulation and you're wondering where to start first. So the SME office is a dedicated contact point and gateway for micro, small, and medium enterprises. It provides practical and concrete support on how to navigate EMA procedures. SMEs benefit from significant fee reductions, support for product information translation, and tailored training and communication events to ensure that they have access to the most up-to-date regulatory and scientific information. So if you are an SME, registering with the SME office is the first step. To register, so the company has to qualify and meet the EU definition of an SME and be established in the European Economic Area. So the application involves a declaration on the SME status, your most recent annual accounts, and information on the ownership. Everything is described on the website. It's very easy. And in case you need help, you can always contact us via the dedicated mailbox or by phone. Something I would like to highlight is also that SME can request SME briefing meetings. These meetings are early, informal sessions to discuss your regulatory strategy across quality, non-clinical, clinical, regulatory, and scientific questions. Typically, is my product eligible to the Prime scheme? Is my product eligible to an orphan designation? Or is the legal basis for my marketing authorization application is correct? These SME briefing meetings help you choose the right tools, understand eligibility for procedure, and can be used as a pre-formal scientific advice. It's free of charge, so if you find the system confusing, SME briefing meetings are a very efficient way to get oriented. So ITF briefing meetings, a second tool, are specifically designed for early and innovative developments. They are free of charge, they last 90 minutes, and they are open to any type of applicant, including academia and SMEs, but also those who do not qualify to this definition. You will get a multidisciplinary discussion with experts from across the EU network on scientific and regulatory aspects. They are particularly useful when your product, technology or methodology does not fit into already existing pathway or a bit borderline. So to request a meeting, you will have to submit to the ITF form, to the secretariat, and the team will contact you. Once again, it's very simple. Everything is described step by step on the EMA website. You really have to understand that the ITF focus on emerging therapies, technologies, and methods. For example, cell and gene therapies, nanomedicine, digital technologies, novel manufacturing approach. So if you are working on a borderline product like organ-on-chip, AI-driven tools, complex combination or data analytics, so ITF is often the first contact and the first way to obtain regulatory and scientific guidance. One message that we'll hear a lot during this presentation is that the earlier you engage, the easier it will be to align your development strategy with regulatory expectation. Yeah. So many first-in-class ideas emerge in academic settings, but the academic teams may not be familiar with all the regulatory pathways. This is why the EMA has a dedicated entry point for academia and non-for-profit developers. So we offer fee incentives, regulatory and scientific support, and opportunities to participate in research and innovation initiatives. Academia can also engage via externally funded pre-competitive projects that include regulatory science work streams. For academic projects, we can advise on product-specific questions across quality, non-clinical, and clinical domain, a bit on the same model that SME briefing meetings. The typical questions are about whether study population are representatives, endpoints are meaningful, how to monitor the long-term safety studies, and all kinds of scientific questions. So this is really designed to help academic developers to plan studies that are to be more easily translated into regulatory evidence later. And of course, academics also have access to fee reduction for scientific advice in certain conditions. The Quality Innovation Group, which is a supporting tool that is really designing for quality matters, it offers a platform to discuss innovative manufacturing and quality approaches that may not fit within the traditional existing paradigm. So engaging with the QIG helps to align novel CMC therapies such as continuous manufacturing or advanced analytics with regulatory expectation. So there are several processes. The qualification of novel methodologies support the development and acceptance of new tools for medicine development. This can include new endpoints, biomarkers, imaging methods, or registry-based strategy, for example. And there are two main outputs. So the qualification advice, which is confidential guidance, and the qualification opinion, which are public. So if you are working on this type of technology, a good first idea to start benchmarking is to have a look at this qualification opinion on the EMA website. So really the aim here is to provide clarity on when and how a method is acceptable for regulatory decision making. So if you are developing a medicine intended to treat rare disease, you might have access to the orphan designation. The orphan designation applies to medicine, so intended for rare, serious conditions affecting fewer than 5 in 10,000 people in the European Union. To qualify, there are certain criteria, which is there must be no satisfactory method of diagnosis, prevention, or treatment, or the products must offer a significant benefit. Among the incentives, once you have this orphan designation, it includes 10 years of market exclusivity, fee reduction, and direct access to the centralized procedures. This orphan drug designation can be requested at various stages before the marketing authorization, but it must be confirmed before the marketing authorization is granted. And all the designations are listed in the European Community Register of Orphan Medicinal Product, meaning once again that if you develop a product in a certain condition, it's a good idea to benchmark, to have a look at the community register to see if a certain product already had an orphan designation in the particular condition. Another mechanism I wanted to tell you about is the ITMP classification, which this classification is aimed to provide regulatory certainty on whether a product is considered an ITMP and which specific guideline might apply. So this procedure is relatively quick, it's 60 days, it's free of charge, and it can be used early in the development to provide more certainty. ITMP certification is an incentive dedicated to SMEs, and it allows an assessment of quality and non-clinical data at any stage of development. This aim is to identify the gaps early, so the gaps and the potential issue can be addressed before moving into a clinical phase and being more costly to resolve. The EMA has a particular scheme designed to provide enhanced and proactive support for developers of medicine that address a particular unmet medical need. This is called the PRIME schemes. Benefits include early scientific and regulatory interaction, a dedicated contact point, and the possibility of an accelerated assessment for the marketing application authorization later. The eligibility to enter this PRIME scheme is based on evidence that the product may offer a major therapeutic advantage or benefit patients with no treatment options. So it can be a really powerful accelerator for SMEs and academia if the data support eligibility, particularly because SMEs and academia can benefit from an early entry point, meaning they have to provide less data than normal pharmaceutical companies, and then the PRIME team will help them to generate the additional data to bridge their PRIME application into their early entry into a full PRIME application. Then we are coming to the main mechanism by which the EMA provides the feedback on your plan to generate data. These are the scientific advice and the protocol assistance. It allows you to discuss your development plan with regulators before you run your pivotal studies. The question addressed typically covers clinical design, for example, are the endpoints appropriated, the statistical method, the comparators, but it can go also through a quality question like the CMC strategy and even the post-authorization evidence plan. What is interesting is that special incentives apply for SMEs. There are significant fee reduction, also for SMEs developing orphan product. So just to be very clear, and it's extremely important, scientific advice is prospective. It is not a pre-assessment of your dossier, but it's a guidance to help you generate the right evidence to support the benefit-risk ratio assessment during the marketing authorization application. So really think of it as a way to reduce the risk of negative opinion or major objection later. So the scientific advice is available for any type of medicine under the EMA remits. And so the protocol, we speak of protocol assistance because it's a specific form of advice for orphan designated product with more focus that is closely liaised to the orphan incentives. And that's it. And now I hand over to my colleagues, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for leading us through these very information-dense slides. And now I want to take some time to address some common developmental pitfalls. So one frequent pitfall, fairly frequent, is unclear product classification, which can be quite easily mitigated or could be quite easily mitigated by an early ITF discussion or advice from a national competent authority, which ultimately prevents later issues down the developmental pipeline. Another one we see quite often is late pediatric planning. We think that the pediatric strategy needs to be considered well before pivotal trials start, essentially. And pivotal trials sometimes have suboptimal endpoints or sample sizes, which can be mitigated, of course, by consulting methodologists inside of our expert network, for instance, or by seeking scientific assistance or scientific advice. CMC strategies may lack robustness. QIG and scientific advice can help to stress test the control strategy. And finally, many developers underestimate post-licensing evidence needs. So to plan post-authorization studies early rather than reactively is very important, as we see. Then some do's, don'ts, and prepares to make some actionable insights from these presentations would be: do engage early. So before you lock in a pivotal study design or major manufacturing investments, do provide a clear, concise background on your current evidence and the options you have considered so far. Do ask specific questions that relate to concrete decisions that you need to make. Don't ask us as the regulators to choose your assay, platform, or vendor. Instead, present your plan strategy and ask if it's adequate. And also, don't treat scientific advice or the ITF briefing meetings as a box-ticking exercise. Because we see plenty of value in honest discussions of uncertainties. And then quite famously, I think Sebastian referred to it in the beginning, I'm going to lead you through a brief high-level comparison, EMA versus FDA. We are both major regulators, but the systems are structured rather differently. In the US, the FDA assesses and also authorizes all medicines centrally for the whole country. In the EU, the EMA kind of coordinates the scientific assessments for certain medicines and issues an opinion, but the European Commission is then set to take the final decision. Many medicines in Europe are still authorized at a national level by the national competent authorities of the member states. Clinical trials are authorized and overseen nationally in the EU, even under the new clinical trials regulations and CTIS. So both regions rely on ICH guidelines and share many concepts, but the institutional setup and some procedures are vastly different. And then also the review timelines, of course, differ a little bit. EMA's active review time for new active substances in the centralized procedure is up to 210 days, excluding the clock stops, which is seeing some rework in the new pharma legislation, which I'm going to talk about briefly quite shortly. The FDA standard review time for new molecular entities is generally around 10 months, excluding sponsor response times. Both regions have early support tools, PRIME in the EU and Fast Track or Breakthrough Therapies, and others in the US. Accelerated assessment in the EU and priority review in the US provide shortened timelines for eligible products. But there are also differences in data and market protection periods and in orphan incentives. So 8 + 2 years of data or market protection and 10 years orphan exclusivity in the EU versus vastly different configurations in the US. And as I mentioned quite briefly, we are in a currently very kind of dynamic environment, I would say. So the new pharma legislation is set to start essentially beginning of 2026. And we're going to explore the tangible impacts of the recent and ongoing legislations that tie into that. These we are currently in a transition period, and it will all become fully applicable in 2028. And this is only very high-level insight on an ongoing, very dynamic process, and the contents of the following slide might change. And we also do not have access to the full details, as we all share the same information basis, essentially. Therefore, if you have any further questions, please refer directly to the official texts. But to sum up, Europe wants to be faster, simpler, and more resilient, and the system should go to reward innovation, reduce unnecessary burdens, and keep critical manufacturing in Europe. And then maybe to lose a few more sentences about the new pharma legislation. So the most significant structural changes are going to be introduced to the EMA for decades. The goal is to create a simpler regulatory environment, and our system, the agency, is set to be a little bit streamlined. So for instance, the committee structure is a little bit consolidated from 5 scientific bodies to just 2. So we are set to only be left with the CHMP and the PRAC to accelerate decision making. Administrative hurdles are being removed. For instance, marketing authorizations will now be valid for an unlimited period by default. And we are shifting to a fully deployed digital first submission and labeling model, currently referred to as EPI. And beyond efficiency, the NPL is designed to improve conditions for innovations. So we are set to introduce regulatory sandboxes, which will allow for the real-time testing of new groundbreaking or frontier technologies like AI-driven therapies in a controlled environment. And there are also adapted frameworks for non-standard medicines, such as personalized therapies, alongside updated processes to ensure more efficient studies for pediatric medicines. And essentially, these reforms present a shift towards a more agile, digital, and innovation-friendly European market. And with that, I'm happy to hand back to Sebastian to sum up.
Thank you so much from Jaap to Thomas to Martin. So I think just some of the key messages, maybe to a little bit of reinforced learning towards the end. And this is also my conclusion. EMA offers multiple opportunities to interact with you across the medicine's life cycle. You're not on your own. We have support for SMEs, for academic developers, and you can benefit from dedicated entry points and even financial incentives, which I know, especially kind of at the early stages, they're essential. My take is that the earlier that you engage, the more you can shape your development plan to align with the regulatory expectations. Regulatory predictability is a shared interest. It helps you, it helps the EMA, it helps also public health. So, with that in mind, investors as well, to a large extent. So, yeah, with that in mind, I would like to perhaps promote what the next steps could be. So if you're a micro, small, medium enterprise, an academic developer, consider registering with the SME office. They actually sit not far from me. They're very friendly people. Or contact the academia mailbox. They're also sitting on the other side. Great people to talk to. If you are working on emerging therapies or technologies, think about requesting an ITF briefing meeting early. These tend to fill pretty rapidly. My colleagues do their best to come back at least with an email or questions within 2 weeks. But it's a resource that is there for you. And especially as you approach key decision points, I would encourage to plan for scientific advice and assess eligibility for PRIME, even orphan designation, and any other appropriate procedures. By all means, use your hub, your biotech hub, use your TTO as a first stop. They can indeed help structure your questions and coordinate with EMA, but do reach out to us directly as well. We will share the presentation. As you've seen, there is all of the contact points and links. So after the session, you can follow up in your own time easily. And we are here. We're open. You have my name. You can reach out. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn as well, but you can reach out to us. And if we don't have the answer, we will certainly channel you through the right colleagues. So yeah, we have a final slide that brings kind of all the key links together. Yeah, with that in mind, I encourage you to reach out to us, especially if you're in doubt. Even a short email can be the start of a productive interaction. So thank you very much for your time and engagement. If you'd like to follow up, well, here are our email addresses. We're happy to connect you to the relevant teams within EMA or even wider European Medicines Regulatory Network. And we look forward and genuinely look forward to collaborating with you to make the EU regulatory pathway clearer, faster, and more predictable for innovators, but also, with the dream of really making EU more competitive and ultimately support public health even beyond. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I'll take it over from here. Many thanks, Sebastian, Thomas, and Martin for the presentation. It's clear that the EU wants to be simpler and faster, and I must say also more personal and friendly, as you say, Sebastian. And so I'm sure that that will be shared when people do reach out to you. So I'm Kim Tran, and I'm the head of the innovation team in Boston, and I have the honor to moderate this Q&A. So I'm hoping that you will take the effort and make use of this opportunity and share your questions. I will give you some time to type any questions that you may have. I do see a first one coming in. Maybe we can give Constance the opportunity to also pose their questions themselves.
Yeah, I mean, whilst we have the questions coming through, one other thing to emphasize is that the EMA has a long-standing collaboration with the FDA, and of course, that's something that we hope to continue. Again, I'm not perhaps directly answering the question from Constance, but yeah, that's a very productive collaboration we had for a long time actually with the FDA and with other agencies across the world, even with Japan. We have a permanent representative on site. So how would you like to do this, Kim? Is there any other questions from the audience, or I can talk a bit more about?
Maybe people are still thinking about it. Yeah, did you want to bring something up that?
No, I mean, I see the question from, is it Constance? Yeah, well, thanks for joining. I think it certainly it's the current environment is a sensitive topic that I will draw myself out of, but for sure, I mean, from EMA, we're looking at certainly stable science and evidence-based as a regulator. That's how we operate. We have transparent procedures. We publish our guidance, and we have this sort of multi-country expert assessment. What we are trying to do is to show the supporting tools we have. I know, again, different industry as an entrepreneur in aerospace and defense, predictability is key, especially as we have to go through maybe, some regulatory process. And it's key to the point that it's part of the path to innovation. Yeah, I mean, in terms of perhaps the international orientation, I can talk, like I said earlier, that EMA continues to work through the global standards and collaboration. One of them is ICH, and we definitely support the global development strategies where appropriate, including, of course, with the US.
And I also see new questions coming in. I hope that answers the question of Constance, but I see a question coming in from Benoit. So I can read it out, but I would love to give the floor to pose the question himself. So I'm looking at my colleague, Lauren.
Do you want to bring the participant onto the screen, or how do you?
Yeah, I think Lauren
Okay.
is working on that end. So I have two in the pipeline. Benoit, you are unmuted, I see.
Yes, but I'd be happy to ask the question myself. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So first, thank you for this great presentation. It's very clear and it brings a lot of clarity in how we can approach regulatory interactions. I was just wondering, in the case of a SME developing innovative methods, while we are often told, to get into contact with the ITF early to make sure that what we develop is aligned with the needs from the agency, how early is it really? Like, what early do you mean? Like after the POC, meaning scientific validation, etc., or do you mean it even earlier? Thank you very much.
I can tackle that just briefly. Well, thanks for the question. And I think for innovative methods, early, what we generally mean is before the proof of concept. So as soon as you have a defined concept or an intended context of use, what decision it supports, in which setting, and any specific regulatory scientific questions, I think that's where the early alignment could prevent, I wouldn't want to call it a wasted effort. But I can see my colleague Thomas has his hand up, so I'll pass it over to him as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. So generally speaking, the rule is that if you have at least preliminary data or like at least an idea of the development plan, even if it's very general, it's always better because then the construction, as precise, if you have precise question, then you will have a more precise feedback. That said, you can perfectly contact them before the proof of concept. And then you can help and handle regulatory expectation also. So you can, if you think that you have enough data to at least a bit show what is the intent and what idea you have in mind, you can perfectly contact before scientific validation. I'm also saying that because the politic of our colleagues in the ITF is that do not ask yourself too many questions, just contact the ITF, and depending on that, they will direct you. So if you are already advanced enough, then they can put you on the track for an ITF briefing meeting, and if not, they can guide you and explain you what are the different options that might be offered to you.
Thank you very much. That's perfectly clear.
Thank you, Benoit, for that very good question. I have a question on our end as well. So it was explained that there's shared competences between the EMA and the member state on some products. So what would you advise how and when to engage with the member state, so the national evaluation boards? Is that also early on in parallel, or any other advice?
I think Thomas. Yeah, Thomas.
Thank you. So in general, so the engagement with the national competent authorities and the engagement with the EMA are complementary. So there are several layers. So of course, in the case of nationally authorized products, because it exists, normally you have to be eligible to the centralized procedure, you have a list of products. So, but if the product is to be authorized nationally, of course, you should engage straight with the national competent authorities. So there is no question about it. Now, if you are developing a product that is intended for the centralized procedure, generally, the general rules is that the national competent authorities it's their responsibility to authorize the clinical trials. So we advise to contact the national competent authorities when at an early stage, or when you are defining your early phase of the clinical trial, like the phase 1 typically. And particularly if you have question on the clinical trial application, meaning on is your clinical trial acceptable or not. And then you will engage with the EMA on really your trial design plan to generate data from a pivotal trial and to ensure that the trial is designed accordingly to generate your benefit risk ratio. So what we advise in general is that when you start planning your clinical phase and from the phase 1, you contact the national competent authorities of the country where the clinical trial will be conducted. But it can also run in parallel with the ITF or early form of EMA, early engagement. That's it. Did I answer to the question?
Yes, definitely for me. So that's a question that we often receive from our network. So that's good to have your answer.
So once, and I also would like to stress out that if you have one question and you don't know where to go, do not hesitate to contact either the SME, the SME office or the academia. Even if it's the answer is no, this is not the remit of EMA, this is the remit of the national competent authorities, then we will redirect you to the NCAs, and then you will have at least a clear path and a good idea on who to contact first.
All right, perfect. I don't see any other questions coming in except for a compliment that it was from Richard from Quantum Delta, that it was very useful.
Well, then, if I may, then I think taking a look at time, we should close just for now. Kim, thank you very much. Again, I think the compliment from Richard is to the point of the goal that we were trying to reach with this webinar. It's been great to have a large audience and a very, very open presentation from the European Medicine Agency in both indeed the knowledge and the procedures, as well as the ease of doing business with a large conglomerate. So Sebastian, thank you very much for breaking those barriers down, I think, in a session like this. It's wonderful that the European Medicine Agency has this very clear competitiveness goal, and that you're working on that full force behind it. From a Dutch perspective, we're of course very proud that the European Medicine Agency's presence has bolstered the Netherlands' role as Europe's connected life sciences and health metropolis. I think is very important. Sandra here in the call is our team lead from the Netherlands Foreign Investment Agency supporting that, and Kim from the Innovation Network. And together with me, we are here on the East Coast of the US, also being able to have that discussion concerning anything that bridges innovation, R&D, prospects of establishing or expanding in the Netherlands is part of our job within the operational unit of the Ministry of Economic Affairs. We will share the information, we will share the links. I would really like to thank everyone for joining, and especially, of course, Sebastian, Thomas, and Martin for a very, very clear, transparent, and within the time given presentation during this webinar. Thank you very much. Have a great week and a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.